Life carries unexpected surprises. As stereotypical as that phrase is when it comes to game analysis videos like this, a lot of the most impactful entertainment media banks on this for a compelling narrative setup. Struggle is an innate aspect of the human experience, and the channeling of cathartic release is a strong connective force between the player and the game. I played Firewatch when it first came out in late 2016. Though I may have forgotten the major story beats between then and when I replayed it recently, I did not forget how the game made me feel. The sympathy generated from the main relationship between the protagonist Henry and your new boss Delilah as you navigate the mysteries of Shoshone National Park over your summer together is something that left a lasting impression years after my initial playthrough. Diving back into Firewatch with a more critical eye has not changed my feelings towards the game and the way it conveys its story. Rather, looking at the devices used to drive the story makes me appreciate the journey more. Firewatch is a single-player adventure game that centers around the relationship between Henry, the player character, and Delilah, your new boss and fellow lookout within Shoshone National Park. The two of you, as the game implies, are watching for fires within the range of the park and inspecting the area for any fire hazards campers or hikers bring through the camp. Throughout the journey, there is a lot of learning to be done about the park and its history, about the characters themselves, and about the past we all try to leave behind. This story and messages are carried through a lot of pathos-related rhetoric, both from narrative devices and with in-game mechanics. This makes sense, since the game ultimately wants to drive home the importance of connections between individuals and how we choose to navigate hardship. Firewatch does this best when it leans into narratological practices, but the mechanics that translate this story to the player are arguably just as important. Firewatch is considered by the gaming community as a walking simulator, in which the player has an open world to explore that has objectives tangential to the story or side quests spotted around the map. Therefore, the most important aspect in engaging the story is the traversal mechanics. Firewatch has a story that parallels reality, and the physics of the game suits this as well, with plausible walking and sprinting speeds, as well as a noticeable speed decrease moving up a large enough incline. There are additional movement capabilities granted to Henry as the game progresses, including climbing rock faces, rappelling down hills, crossing large gaps, and hopping over fallen objects. When each of these facets of movement are first introduced in the game, through the proxy of Henry, it takes its time to set up the mechanic and has the player character learn and adjust to the mechanic in a realistic way. While there are a lot of nuances added to traversal in this way, this additive movement system serves Firewatch in two major ways. These mechanics serve an exploration-based functionality, as although the map is mostly open from the beginning, these new movement mechanics help you explore new areas of the open world, as well as allow the player to backtrack easier in later segments of the game and its concurrent story. The movement mechanics also serve as a method of nonverbal storytelling in the way that Henry traverses the park grounds with a high degree of proficiency with the later half of the game, showing how Henry has adapted to the environment over the course of the summer. Not only does the movement reflect proficiency over the game, but so too does the stimulation of virtual spatial navigation that works similarly to our real-world spatial navigation. Henry is initially given a map and a compass to navigate the starting paths of the game, which personifies our stepping into foreign territory, as well as Henry's uneasiness with the new job he has taken. As seen in the footage, my initial traversal was sluggish and riddled with uncertainty, leading me to constantly check my bearings and make sure I was going where the game wanted me to for the sake of story progression, just as Henry would in this new environment. However, Firewatch offers several tools to develop spatial recognition within the game, the first being visual landmarks. Certain areas of the map have distinct visual signatures or unique pathing techniques that cause the player to remember that certain location because of how different it is to navigate compared to other spaces, such as the winding bush paths to Jonesy Lake or the pathways sprouting from the medicine wheel. These visual distinctions not only add variance to the park's environment, but also adds world building from times separate from the relevant story being told. The other tools that help with in-game navigation are the ranger caches sprinkled throughout the park, with notes from previous lookouts or forest rangers, or finding details of the map for Henry to use. Using Henry's personal notes also help remember the locations better, since he often writes down areas of interest that are not otherwise dictated on the map, and encourages the player to return and explore the environment further to truly embrace Henry's growing familiarity with the park. Virtual spatial recognition skills are not the central focus of the game, but the way these skills are tested within the game can serve educational purposes as well. Maja Pivec and Paul Kearney, a game education professor and computer science professor respectively, states that games with educational focuses provide an opportunity for learners to apply acquired knowledge and to experiment, get feedback in form of consequences, thus getting experience in the safe virtual world. This can evidently apply to virtual spatial recognition, but Firewatch's real focus is on emotional storytelling. The story itself does not offer any strong universal truth for a player to live by, but rather the game itself is a message about being in the moment. This is brought into focus by the characters and the narrative itself. Characters are the gateway of empathy in a narrative experience. Espen Aarseth, a Norwegian computer researcher, stated that trends in narrative games suggest that the most important dimension for storytelling in games is that of agents/characters. This indicates that the most effective way of creating ludonarrative content is to invest in character creation by making the characters rich, deep, and interesting. The main characters in the game are Henry, who is the player character, and Delilah, his boss. Through the introductory sequence of the game, we learn that Henry has reached about the midpoint of his life, starting a family with his wife Julia, until she got an unfortunate diagnosis of early onset dementia, which makes life very difficult for the both of them. Henry takes the time to ensure she is cared for and escapes to Shoshone National Park for a job and some distance from his personal drama. Life-changing diagnoses are not easily handled in the real world either, with many people surrounding the person with the diagnosis, as well as the perfect receiving it, being racked with grief and all of its accompanying stages. Henry takes a realistic method of leaving the situation when he is first able to, yet he noticeably feels guilt for leaving his wife behind in the state that she's in, with her memories of him fading more and more with each day. The introductory sequence leans on pathos to attach us to Henry as a character and to understand where he comes from and where his values are as we progress into the main story. This leads into our second character, Delilah, who is the experienced lookout that offers to guide and be a companion to Henry. This is the majority of the decision-making that occurs in the game, determining the interaction and the quality of the relationship between Henry and Delilah. Upon first contact, Henry is a little prickly and standoffish, not exactly trusting to a stranger prying into his personal business. But in my playthrough of Firewatch, I answered as I would if I were in his situation. Because of my choices, Delilah realized she overstepped her boundaries and offered her trials and tribulations as story fodder. Throughout my playthrough, the two characters learn to trust and joke around with each other, even when they are uncovering the mysteries of previous hikers and abandoned government research sites. Pivec and Kearney also appeal to game investment and learning, of which they stated the following. Adventure games use intrinsic motivation of the player to explore the game world. Intrinsic motivating games incorporate learning activities in this game world. To increase immersion of the player, the game offers an extensive story at the beginning, often related to some murder or mystery. Game characters have to solve the mystery by solving a number of interrelated problems. In each case, the problems are part of the game, and players are motivated to seek for knowledge to provide a solution in order to continue with the game. In this described game, enjoyment is strongly related to the learning activity, which can be viewed as a desirable outcome. These plot devices of discovering secrets across the camp, of those who have gone missing and those that were abandoned, combined with the character dynamic between the player and the non-player character, fuels an intense connection to the interpersonal drama and the events of the story as they unfold. Driving emotional connection in this way is what drew me to love this game in the first place, and what fuels the emotional weight behind the story, from the eruption of the fire, to the radio documents, to the fate of Brian Goodwin. Regardless of how the two characters receive the events around them, and how they receive each other as people, the fire at the start of the summer grows too large to be controlled, and the characters are forced to evacuate their posts. Many of the loose narrative ends are closed abruptly. Delilah and Henry share their goodbyes, and they both leave Shoshone National Park as the flames swept up all Henry grew familiar with. Some who have played this game are unsatisfied with the way the narrative is constrained to one choice at the end of the story. That even though dialogue trees were numerous and varied, and completely altered the relationship between Henry and Delilah, the game ends up the same way. Elin Carstensdottir and her associates of Northeastern University in Boston assert that if all narrative events are in a fixed and unchangeable order, it is a linear structure. Linear stories frequently feature variations in flavor text, but story events always occur in the same order. Lack of replayability is a drawback of linear structures, but alternatively, they offer cohesive and controlled narrative experiences. This is an understandable upset when you consider that this game presented itself as a branching narrative structure through the multiple dialogue trees. Yet branching narratives are much harder to account for on the larger scale of the game, and the integration of multiple endings and potentially more features that would detract from the grounded aesthetics. Firewatch deliberately focuses on the relationship between characters, but neither of them are able to control what happens in the end of the story, and for some, that is unsatisfying. To me, however, I think this reflects perfectly to the uncertainty of life. The story of Firewatch parallels that of the introductory sequence of the game. Henry meets a young woman who is self-assured and doing the best with what she has. They have their lives entangled for a period of time, and then a life-altering event separates them. While there is an option to be romantically interested in Delilah, as you are with Julia, that is not the route I pursued in my playthrough. Instead, I had Henry treat her as a friend and as an equal, since both of them come to escape some emotional burdens and try to better themselves with time away, and that camaraderie stuck with me the most, as it was two flawed people picking each other up. The uncertainty of Julia's dementia and the wildfire both represent major events that disrupt the flow of life as a whole, but Henry still perseveres through both events with the motivation to find the proper answer for his wife. He triumphs over adversity not as a stereotypical action hero, but as a person bearing hardship with stride. I believe that this is the crucial message of the game, and an important lesson to share with people of all ages in this approachable, stylistically immaculate, and emotionally impactful tale. For those who took upon a different meaning for this game, I do not want to dissuade you from your own feelings. As Miguel Sicart said about the meaning of games, play is everything about a player engaged in a game, and less about the rules of such game. The structure of Firewatch is not revolutionary nor innovative on a classic formula, yet the writing of the story and the emotions it dredges up from the player is the true staying power of Firewatch. The mechanics of the game are here to elevate the story outside what the game forces you to experience, and that is the point I want to make. The echoes of the way this game caused me to feel will not leave my mind for many years to come, and it teaches a valuable lesson on how to persevere through adversity and bring care to those around